this okay to sit here?
That's fine.
Bright lights. Very bright.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Linda Kabulian, a faculty member at the Kennedy School of Government and the moderator of this evening's panel discussion, Redefining the Family, What are the Rights of Gay and Lesbian Parents? Now, before the discussion begins, I want to say a few words about the organization of this evening's presentation. I'm honored by the request of the sponsors, the Kennedy School Committee on Issues of Sexual Orientation, to chair this presentation, and the committee and I am grateful for the co-sponsorship of the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy and for the assistance of the forum staff. This is the third annual forum event held at the Kennedy School and organized by the committee. Previous events have included, and you may remember, a forum evening on the banning of gays and lesbians from the military service and local and statewide referenda limiting the rights of gays and lesbians. The committee members who worked on this presentation are all staff members at the Kennedy School, though the committee's membership is wider than that. I want to give you this background so that you appreciate a comment made to me by someone who said that this committee has a track record of sponsoring wonderful forum events that are, quote, a year or two ahead of the media on the issue. And it struck me as first sort of a compliment, and then I thought to myself, well, of course, right? I mean, I imagine that many people here in the audience know that the gay and lesbian community are usually a year ahead or two of the media on issues of concern to the gay and lesbian community. At least. I mean, I was also expect to get a little critical and say, only a year or two? Wait a minute, all right. Well, I also give you this background so that you understand that despite the committee's best efforts, both this year and in the past, the committee was unsuccessful in recruiting and is disappointed to say that a panelist will not be with us to discuss what the committee calls the traditional values perspective. But I myself can name about a half a dozen people who have spoken or advocated limitations of rights of gay and lesbians to parent, or who have publicly expressed moral discomfort with homosexuality and were invited to speak but declined to be with us tonight. So I want to say to you members of the audience, if it's fireworks or fist fights between the panelists that you came here for, I'm afraid that we can't oblige. However, I want to tell you that there are several reasons why I think that you should look forward to the presentations of the panelists and the discussion that will follow. If you are gay or lesbian, or you care for a gay and lesbian, you will want to hear the first speaker about the current legal complexities of parenting, custody, and adoption. If you care about families, you'll want to hear the second speaker about the experience of a lesbian couple and their children interacting with institutions and communities that supposedly support family life. If you care about children, you'll want to hear from our last speaker about pertinent research on the welfare of children growing up in gay and lesbian families. If you're unfamiliar with issues of concern to the gay and lesbian community, or you're unacquainted with gay and lesbian people, you should know that it's the sincere wish of the committee that you feel welcome tonight and that you use this evening to acquaint yourself and ask questions that you've wanted answers to. A special word to students pursuing a career or public life and public leaders who may be hearing this presentation. If you agree with the panelists, then use this evening to think about how to formulate a public mandate to guarantee the rights of gay and lesbian people to parent, and think about how to have inclusive social policies that support family life and the welfare of children. If you disagree with the panelists, please know that the committee welcomes you tonight and asks that you use this evening to think about the two following issues. If, as a society, we are comfortable limiting the rights of gay and lesbian people to parent their own children or to parent children who have no other parents simply because of our discomfort with homosexuality or a moral sanction of homosexuality, then where is the limit of society's rights to prevent people from parenting? Is it on an individual's degree of religiosity? Is it the belief in a particular religion or any religion? Is it physical capacity? Should hearing impaired parents raise hearing children? And secondly, what alternatives to gay and lesbian parenting would you suggest for the biological children of gay and lesbian parents and for children without biological parents? To everyone, please hold your questions on all these issues and on the panelists' remarks until the end of the presentation, when you will have an opportunity to address them and engage in a conversation. Our first panelist is Catherine Triante Filo, immediately to my left, is a nationally known expert in lesbian and gay issues, legal issues, particularly family law. Recently, she won a landmark case establishing co-parent adoption in Massachusetts. She currently teaches family law at Suffolk University Law School, a course on sexual orientation in the law at Northeastern University Law School, is the founder and former co-chair of the National Lesbian and Gay Law Association, the Massachusetts Lesbian and Gay Law Association as well, and is a city councilor in the city of Cambridge. Catherine.
Thank you. I usually like to begin talking about lesbian and gay family law by asking everybody if they have a family, and usually the answer is, of course, yes. And I think that one of the problems in talking about this issue and confronting it on a level of policy that you may be interested in is that we have an enormous increase in this country right now in the rise of the right and the rise of this notion of family values. And I always wonder, what does it mean? I mean, what are family values? Does that mean, you go to McDonald's and buy the family dinner? Does that mean, there are 5 of you? Does that mean there's a tall and a short one, a large and a small one in your family? I don't know what family values means, and maybe that may be as a result of my upbringing, although I come from a very traditional Greek-American family where the values that I learned about are exceedingly conservative. So I'm not sure that the environment has anything to do with what I learned as a person or how I became a lesbian. In terms of the legal issues that are involved, and my job tonight is probably to focus your thinking about the actual legal issues that are involved, and we'll probably get into more of the esoteric comments about family values a little bit later, but let me focus a little bit on why it's a problem. And I think that maybe you already know that it's a problem. In the most dramatic case you've probably read about was in Virginia, involving a lesbian mother whose child was taken away from her in a court battle between the woman and her mother. And it's probably one of the type of case that is every lesbian's worst nightmare, is having your parents swoop in and steal your kid. But the more traditional, if I may, more traditional kinds of lesbian custody cases that arise in the legal arena usually involve a woman who has been heterosexually married for a long period of time and at some point decides that he or she is gay. They come out, and may come out during the marriage or shortly after, and they have children. In Massachusetts, we're fortunate to have a very positive law with regard to lesbian and gay custody that began well in the early 80s in terms of the case law, that basically states that unless a party can show a substantial relation between your lesbianism or your homosexuality and a negative impact on the child, then it's irrelevant. in many respects, your homosexuality is irrelevant. This translated several years later into saying that if you can have joint custody with your spouse, if you are gay and you're living with a partner. So in many respects, Massachusetts is in the forefront of acknowledging lesbian and gay relationships, and that's slightly different than acknowledging lesbian and gay families. That struggle, of course, involved people going through the court system where you have a good legal case, but a legal precedent, but that doesn't necessarily translate into the everyday problems of going into court in different counties in Massachusetts and arguing this case, because it's not only the judge you're dealing with social workers or probation officers who have their various prejudices, and you have court personnel who have their own prejudices and how you deal with the system. This is magnified when you move out of states like Massachusetts and you move into states that don't have as active a lesbian and gay community and as large a support network as we have here in terms of legal systems, social systems, and advocacy groups that are supportive in a 100% way, so that once your child gets ripped from you, you have 50 organizations ready to descend on any particular court, or you have the media that will respond to that kind of pressure here. In many respects, other jurisdictions don't have that kind of support. The major courts, the major states such as New York and California, are all very supportive. But generally, when you leave Massachusetts, you have states that have difficult times recognizing that lesbian and gay parents should have their children or be able to visit with their children. And then you still have the problem, it's not just whether you should biologically have your own biological children with you, but should you have a relationship with a gay partner and have your children with you. So they may be able to understand that you as a biological parent should have your child with you, but you shouldn't have your child with you if you're going to have a relationship with someone. So in many respects, it's a decision that's focused on biology, not so much family values, but biology being an appropriate nexus for you to recognize in the court system. We don't want to take your kids away from you unless you're unfit. In the context of these kinds of custody cases is the focus, the traditional focus on what do gays and lesbians do in bed. Now, when I teach family law or when I teach sexual orientation law, I always have to start off by talking about sex. And that is, and what I tell my students in my sexual orientation class, if they're going to be litigating these kinds of cases, is you have to be tremendously comfortable with sex and sexual concepts. That is because when you walk into court dealing with someone who has a sexual identity that is not the norm, everyone around you are going to be thinking about what you do in bed. Now, if you're not thinking about that right now, you're kind of peculiar, because most people, if I hadn't said, am I a lesbian, you might have been thinking, well, is she gay? Is she straight? What's her partner like? You're thinking those thoughts. So the judges you deal with are all thinking these thoughts too. So it's like you have to be comfortable with sex, and you have to be comfortable with the fact that you are being perceived as a sexual being. The primary reason is because people think that gays and lesbians are always having sex. Now, you and I, maybe some of you realize that I get up in the morning and I have coffee or tea and I have breakfast and then I have sex. I mean, but that's not absolutely correct. The schedule I have now rarely leaves much time for anything, let alone coffee or tea. But anyway, but that's what people think of you, and that's what they see. And you have to overcome this prejudice that your quote-unquote lifestyle is deviant because of your sexual identity, and that somehow you are different from heterosexuals because you spend and are preoccupied with sexuality. So that's one reason, and one reason when you're practicing in this area, you have to be very comfortable with it. Now, getting back to the issue of custody, though, is that when you go to a court and they want to know, and the opposing side is always bringing up, and I'm sure they brought it up in Virginia, and they bring it up in every custody case you can imagine, is, well, they're having sex in front of the children. That's it. You walk, they're having sex in front of the children. And usually I say, well, what do you mean? What kind of sex are you talking about? Well, And the answer is always, you know. It's never explicit. I say, well, are they kissing? Are they fondling? Are they, and I really try to make people say the words out loud, because usually it is embarrassing to them and they can't cope. And that's the kind of thing you have to explain to a judge. That, well, does it mean that they're holding each other's hands? Are they snuggling on the couch watching television? Do they have their arms around each other? I mean, are they actually doing actual sexual contact? Are they clothed? Are they undressed? But everybody believes that all lesbians and gay people have sex, full-blown sex, on the floor in front of their children. So you have to overcome them. One of the other issues in terms of that particular kind of case, when you overcome the prejudices, is that you can establish to the courts and to people at large that it's okay to have gay families. And I think one of the other speakers is going to talk about that, some of the prejudices in daily life. But there is an aspect of it that's cleared by the United States Supreme Court many years ago, when it dealt with race relations, and an interracial marriage dealt with the fact that you can't deprive someone of custody because of the attitude of someone else. That if it harms the children because there's prejudice and children of gay people are going to be harmed by it, that's okay when you're dealing with race. But people in dealing with lesbian and gay custody cases, that now is frequently the issue. Okay, you can have your children, but we don't think it's a good idea because the kids are going to have the slings and arrows of the kids. They're going to make fun of them. They're going to have problems in school. So it's kind of gone to a different level. With each step and each progress we make as lesbian and gay people, there's always a new issue. Like, you're okay, you're not crazy, you don't have sex in front of your kids, but your kids are going to be embarrassed by other kids. And that's why you shouldn't have your kids. Okay. Let me get on to another step of custody. That's what I call your regular lesbian and gay custody case, your normal lesbian and gay custody case. There has been a tremendous effort in the last, I would say, 10 years, as the lesbian and gay community has come of age, to push for our own families. And I don't think it was really an agenda item. I don't think someone sat down and said, okay, now we will have children. But I think there was a growing sense in the community, both straight and gay, with the advent of technology, to use alternative insemination and to have children. And that women were suddenly saying, well, why not? I've always wanted a kid, why not? I don't need to be married, I don't need to do anything, I can just go to a sperm bank, or I can find a friend and I can become inseminated and have a child. This trend has resulted in enormous numbers of lesbian and gay families throughout the country. The result is, of course, there's been some litigation around it in terms of what are the legal rights of these families and the person who is the non-biological parent. And frequently, and there have been cases that say the non-biological parent, and I use parent as pertaining to the person who is the lover and who has maybe made the joint decision to have the child, who has nurtured the child and dealt with the child from infancy, that parent, that co-parent, is suddenly without any legal rights. And there have been cases in California and cases in New York, surprisingly, suggesting that this non-biological parent does not have any rights, does not have any standing. And that is a very, very scary concept in terms of what do you do when you go to schools or when you go to the hospital, or your partner, something happens to your partner, or your parents are not supported. You have no rights. The only tie we acknowledge is the biological tie. So that has raised the ante in many respects in terms of developing our families. As a result, there have been a number of cases having to do with co-parent adoption, whereby one of the non-biological mother is allowed to adopt the biological child, and they essentially, in Massachusetts and other jurisdictions, they both adopt, so they both become adoptive parents. And this is a relatively new phenomenon. In Massachusetts, it's just happened in the last year or so, and it was allowed in 7 other jurisdictions in the United States within the last 5 years. That is a phenomenal thing to have happen, and it is pressing really all of the buttons in the world when you're talking about confronting traditional notions of family. The concept is foreign. when courts start thinking in terms of we are having our own families now. It's not that we just got married and oops, we discovered we were gay. Now we are consciously choosing to have children. Now 10 years ago, I remember an article in the Boston Globe by Ellen Goodman, who thought that this was horrific, that by some accident it was okay for lesbians to have children, but to actually choose to go out and have a fatherless child was somehow very, very irresponsible. I'm not sure if she's changed her opinion in the last 10 years, but certainly the gay community has changed its opinion, and this has happened very frequently, that there are no male figures in a number of lesbian families. And the question is, well, is that right? And I'm sure that some of you may even not agree that that's right. Some of you may feel that that's a bad thing, even though you think that lesbians and gay people should have custody of their children. One other aspect of it, and I'll move from this and you can certainly ask me questions later, is not just the adoption part of it, the part where you can legalize your filial relationships with children, but there's also the domestic partnership aspect of it. How do we legally sanctify our relationships as adults, not just to our children, but to each other? In Massachusetts and in many other states, if your partner dies, you don't have a number of rights. You certainly couldn't sue, for example, for loss of consortium. You don't necessarily inherit. You cannot file joint tax returns. There are a number of rights that you have automatically in marriage that you don't have as a gay person. In addition, when you dissolve that union, it is an enormous legal cost and an emotional cost for you to have any rights. And I've just concluded a number of cases where lesbians or gay people have tried to dissolve their relationship and have houses that they've bought together and things like that, that require an enormous amount of effort in the legal system. They don't like these cases. They don't like gay people who break up. They don't like them when they get together. They definitely don't like them when they break up. It's like, get out of my courtroom. So what it brings us to, and I think generally, let me close with this notion, is that we are at an area of the law. I mean, a lot of people think that the military was the place where the big battle happened, that the military is what changed the attitudes and confronted the establishment about gay cases. I think that the military, this whole thing about the military and the Pentagon really established that what heterosexual men are afraid of taking showers with other men. That's all I can get out of this, what happened to it. What is really going to test if we have made progress and if we have changed is the notion of gay and lesbian family law. If we can accommodate this change of the family and the idea of family value, what does it mean? If we are able to define it as relationships between people who love each other and support each other and provide emotional, economic, or social affiliation, which is for the best interests of the child or for the good of that unit, then we will have made progress. But we are confronting the religious right, and we are not just the religious right, we are confronting all of our own phobias and our own oppressions about what we think the family is, whether we think it should have a mommy and a daddy, or a mommy and a mommy and a daddy and a daddy. And that's going to be the hardest part, is not just winning over the right, but winning over all the people that are in this audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cindy Rizzo, Associate Director of Development at the Fenway Community Health Center in Boston, and parent of 2 children, ages 7.5 and 2. And very cute, I might add. I saw their photo. Cindy has been involved in working with other parents to advocate for the rights of gay and lesbian people. She's working on an anthology of fiction around gay and lesbian parenting issues, and she'll be bringing a first-person perspective on the issues that Catherine discussed.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. I appreciate being asked. As Linda mentioned, I have 2 children. My partner and I have 2 children. One is 7.5. He's in the 2nd grade in a public school, and the other is 2, and he's in a daycare center as a toddler. And as I speak from a personal perspective, I'm kind of straddling my own personal perspective of my own family and that of my community, because it's really important for me to stress not just what I did or what my partner and I did, but that we exist in a context of a community of other families of lesbian parents and gay male parents who are struggling with the same issues we do and who support us and who we give support to as well. And so that's really important. Also, I don't think that our experience speaks to or represents every experience out there, and it's really important to keep that in mind as well as I talk about that. But sometimes an example is helpful in illustrating a number of concepts that you might be thinking about or that other people may be raising tonight. My partner and I have been together 16 years. And we waited until we were together 9 years before we had a child, some of which was because of some of the topics that, some of the ideas that Catherine brought up in her talk, which was that as our community matured and as I guess also the demographics of the baby boom and the biological time clock started ticking, people started to think about having children. Advances in technology and so forth allowed us as a community to mature, and for many of us entering our 30s to think about having children. So we were together a long time, and that was helpful to us and important for us to work out lots of issues in our own relationship so that we felt that we had a solid foundation to offer a third person joining our family. I think that that was a good decision for us. We spent 2 years before we had a child thinking about having a child, and that brings me to sort of switching over into context, which is that most of the lesbian couples or single women or gay men that we know that are parents now or are in the process of becoming parents have spent a long time thinking about it. There's a lot of issues that people think about, but mostly people think about, how is a child going to affect my life? And I think that because heterosexual people are sort of on a train of expectations, if you will, where they fall in love, become engaged, get married, get gifts, all the things we didn't get, and the gifts, and set up household and have children, given the expectations of their extended families, etc. There's not a lot of time often to think about what that might mean or whether that should happen, or of course it should happen. And I think with gay people, because the process of having children sometimes involves lots of choices, we are thinking a lot about it, and the deliberateness of it is all very present in our decision making. Some of the things that we considered and some of the things that people consider as they go through this is certainly the method of having children. Adoption is one method that many people choose, or insemination, alternative insemination. And then if you choose that route, we as lesbians have the option of oftentimes deciding who will bear the child. And probably one of the few benefits we have over heterosexual people. Although many women have children because they were in formerly heterosexual relationships or marriages and then came out, and there's certainly that happens now, and there's a generation of children who were born into heterosexual families or relationships whose parents subsequently came out, and whose experiences overlap my own and also differ quite markedly from it. And then for those of us who use alternative insemination, we have to decide whether the person who donates the sperm will be someone known to us or someone unknown to us. And yet a third choice, someone who could potentially be known to the children when they come of age at 18. And so these are discussions that we have and decisions that we make, and we make them all differently. In our circle of friends, people have made all sorts of decisions about those particular issues. And then there's a whole slew of coming out issues that have to be reconciled with. Certainly, if you're going to be pregnant, you will be coming out at least as a pregnant person, and then by extension as a pregnant lesbian or single person if you're not out. That's obviously something to think about at your job, with your extended family, your parents, your siblings, grandparents, etc., and how that all fits into the context of where you're at as a gay person at that point. So there's a lot of decisions that we all have to make besides the obvious ones of, can we afford a child, do we have enough room in our house for a child, decisions that you would expect most people have to reconcile with before they have children. So that's something that really marks the experience of most of the people that I know, and certainly my own. The thing that has also happened once we've had children over the past 10 or 12 years, as people in our community have had children already having been out lesbians and gay men, is that we've begun to build community. Oftentimes that happens in smaller networks of friendship groups with people who have children the same age. Certainly in my case, that's been what's happened. And sometimes it happens through more formal organizations, organizations that form for the purpose of actually discussing the choices involved in having children, or organizations that form in response to the fact that families exist with children. Over the past 6 or 8 months, as some of these issues have come forward in the press, there's been a lot of discussion within our community about how to best organize as families with children, and what issues do we want to be visible on, and a lot of discussions about organizing in schools, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute when I get into the issue of institutions. But what we've managed to create in our own smaller sort of extended community of lesbian parents, in our case lesbian parents, is a group of about a half a dozen families that where the children have grown up together. We often describe it as if they're cousins. They have that kind of sort of very familiar relationship with each other. And because the parents all know each other, there's sort of a family feeling to it as well, a little different than they would have with their friends in school. And what we created with 4 of the children was what we call a babysitting co-op, which started when they were a little over 2 years old, and they sleep over each other's houses in pairs once each month. And it's a simple thing, and it was originally conceived to let each of us get out of the house once in a while. But what it's grown into is something that's so much more than that for the children, especially now that they're 6 and 7, almost 8 years old. They really have a tight-knit group with each other. And what I'm seeing is, as they come into the wider world through their school experiences, is that they rely on each other for safety and support, and sort of a touchstone. It's also, I think, helped my oldest son, who's been involved in it, really have a sense of he's not the only one. That's something that we deliberately set out to create for him, this feeling that he's not the only one. And through this relationship with these children and the other children he knows who have lesbian parents or gay male parents, it's been really important for him to know that that's the case. And, you know, every kid is going to be different. Every kid's going to grow up different. They're not all going to want to march out with a sign and, you know, for gay and lesbian rights, and you know, just the way every person makes that decision on their own. But I've really noticed a lot as he's grown up just how he is very comfortable with that, with his family, and how he speaks with people who don't have lesbian and gay parents in a very comfortable manner. In terms of institutions, I'm on a timeline. I'm on a time limit here, but I want to speak very quickly, but at least touch on some of that. Our children have both been in daycare centers. My oldest been in school and camp. And most of the time we function as their advanced people in a way. We make sure that the community we live in, the schools they go to, the daycare centers we enroll them with, are places that are comfortable with gay and lesbian families and with them, and we really check it out. And I think most of our friends do too. Some of that you can do quite easily, and some of that, unfortunately for some people, is limited by their economic situation and where they can afford to live and send their children to school, and what they can afford to pay for school or daycare. And that's an important thing to understand, and that's a real big issue in our community, is access to resources for those kinds of things. But the most important thing for us is to keep our children safe. So what we want is to make sure that teachers or daycare providers refer to us the way our children do. If we're both called mommy, then that's how they should refer to us, to the children, or in our case, we're mama and mommy, and that kind of thing. Just those little things mean a lot, especially from the perspective of a small child. And not to ask a lot of personal questions to us in front of the children, things like, who's the father? Just things that confuse the child more than anything else and bring up things in an inappropriate way in terms of the child's development and their age. Don't make them feel less than, that they're the only one, that other children's families are better, and to be proactive in the fight against homophobia in those institutions. So when teasing starts in the second, third, fourth grades and kids are called faggots, or words come up that may not even have any attachment to thinking that somebody's being teased because they're perceived as being gay or lesbian, still using those words just like you wouldn't want words to be used for any ethnic or racial group. It's important for providers and for teachers to interfere and stop that kind of language from being used and explain why it's not appropriate. And inclusion is another thing that we're looking for. Things like books in the classroom. There's a growing number of books, none of them yet being perfect, but it's the beginnings of storybooks for children that incorporate diversity of families. Our oldest child went to Tufts, where Janet's the director, and there was an issue where a parent protested the fact that the book Daddy's Roommate, which is a picture book, it really has very few words even in it, was in the classroom, and decided that his daughter might grow up to be a lesbian because that book was there. And what happened was, what was great about that experience was that we found out about the struggle around dealing with that parent after he had been dealt with and after the decision by the teacher was that the book would stay in the classroom over his objection. And we didn't have to interfere, and we didn't have to say, what do you mean this is happening, or be present in that discussion. We found out that everything had, been taken care of and that it was going to be fine. In our son's daycare, our little son's daycare, one of the teachers went out and bought a calendar that celebrates gay and lesbian families, and took some of the nice black and white photos and put them around the room with the other photos that they have in daycare classrooms that are at 2-foot levels for the little kids to see on the walls. And that was a really welcoming thing. In schools, it's really important when discussions about families come up and issues about family that our families are included, so that our children know that their family is just one of a variety of different families that exist, and that they feel included and welcome. That the forms you fill out when you enroll your children in school are forms that don't say mother, father, that they say parent, parent, and that's a signal to all gay and lesbian parents enrolling their children that the school has thought about this and that family diversity is of a concern. Whether or not those parents come out in the school, it's important to feel welcome and safe in the school. The power of language is really important. I know people feel that there's a tyranny of language going on now, but I think that for those of us who feel very deprived by the language, the power of it still is with us. And then continuing awareness and education of teachers and staff at schools about how to best incorporate these issues in their curriculum and how to deal with family diversity, specifically the diversity of having gay and lesbian parents, children of gays and lesbians in their classrooms. I guess I'll have to stop here because my time is running out, but I just feel like the most important thing is that we do this to make our children feel good about who they are and to make their growing up a positive experience. And if we do that, then these concerns that Catherine talked about around the court saying that kids will tease them, those concerns will become less and less strong a reason to hook somebody's denial of custody or visitation on. That it's an environment that we all have to create, and not just something that our families have to go out and do the work to create it. It's really something that it's a mutually shared obligation in a society of people that supposedly should be caring about one another. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Dr. Janet Zeller, Director of the daycare center that Cindy was talking about at Tufts Educational Daycare Center, which is a laboratory early childhood program, and a faculty member at the Elliott Pearson Department of Child Study. Among her research activities is work on social policy aimed at children, and she has a great deal of experience as well, being an expert home visitor in custody situations.
Good evening. I've absolutely in my whole life never been amplified. And I just quiver at the thought of blowing the walls of this building. I mean, it seems to be redundant, but
You sound
if
great.
you start vibrating, I'll. It's interesting to me to listen to Catherine and to Cindy, because so much of what both of you said, particularly Catherine, because Cindy and I are in much more constant contact, particularly what Catherine says about kind of the evolution of the law in terms of how it views lesbians. The area that I really do most of my teaching about at Tufts is on children with special needs, and it kind of there's almost a parallel between these two movements. One of the most common myths about the disabled, particularly people who are mentally retarded, is either that they are asexual or they're sex crazed. It's a very common myth, but there's a lot of concern about sexuality in the disabled. And then the other kind of parallel I see is we have a wonderful book at Tufts in our classrooms, particularly in our classrooms for 3- and 4-year-olds. It's called Chimpy. And it's a wonderful book to me because the protagonist in the book is a 3-year-old youngster who is trying to find a lost stuffed animal. And she's portrayed in this book as very, very competent. And the book is all about her tracing her footsteps throughout the day to see if she can backtrack and find this stuffed animal. The child in the book happens to have Down syndrome, and the book, it's not illustrated, it's photographed. But no mention is made of this, so it's kind of just, she happens to have Down syndrome. When I think about the books we have at Tufts and the books that are available that deal with issues of gay and lesbian parenting and families that are headed by gays and lesbians, they are all about the issue. So far, no one's written the book, the equivalent of Chimpy. And I don't know what that means. I think there's kind of, that's the next step, and something maybe we can collaborate on together. Really. When Linda called me, she asked if I would talk about the developmental issues that accrue for children whose parents are lesbian and gay. And I said, well, there was really very little to talk about in that regard, because the only developmental issues that accrue are those that gravitate around how these kids' families are viewed by others, which is exactly the same thing that Catherine was talking about. Let me just, read that sentence because it's the only prepared sentence I have. And that is that the developmental issues are only those that accrue to the way children of gay and lesbian parents see their families mirrored back or viewed by the people in the institutions around them. And I was so struck by kind of the tautological argument that you were making about how institutions view gays and lesbians who want to parent, that it's okay for you to parent, but really you shouldn't because people are going to treat you poorly. And I guess that my work is all around making sure that people don't treat children poorly because their parents are gays and lesbians. And I'd go a step further than Cindy, because she said that the most important thing for her and for Margie is to keep their children safe. And for me, the most important thing is to keep your children validated and celebrated. And fortunately, we're going to have another go-around because Kobe's going to arrive at Tufts next year. I think the points that I want to make are best made by this handout. I'm going to actually have the ushers hand this up, but I have some instructions first. You're going to each get a packet. The reason that these are Xerox is because we couldn't get a transparency to operate in this bright light. I want you to take the packet of 4, and there aren't enough for everyone, so make sure that you're sharing them. And every other person take one as far as they go. Is there? this person with the incorrect sweatshirt? Oh, because she has to, okay. I want you to tear off the first 2 pages and give the last 2 pages to the person next to you. And I want you to read either the first 2 pages or the last 2 pages, but not both. What they are, well, should I tell them what they are?
Tell them what the form is, actually.
Okay. Well, okay.
This is a Kennedy school, they need more instructions.
Okay. All right. That's right, I thought I was back at Tufts, excuse me, but I remember I was a graduate student at Harvard, so I'll hearken back.
They want to make sure they do it right.
The first 2 pages, which you'll notice as soon as you get them, are rendered anonymous, is a letter in support of an adoption. I guess that's all I want to say about it until they read it.
You wrote this letter.
Though both letters are written by me, they're signed by me. I haven't anonymized myself. I'm out as a letter writer. And the second 2 pages are, as you'll see right up front, are also a petition for adoption. I don't want to say more because it'll ruin the surprise. Oh yeah, actually you would be interested. So read quickly because you should be able to. Don't read both, just read one and then put your heads down on your desk.
I was going to say there's going to be a test in about 20 minutes.
Yeah. Amanda, you could come up and sing. How are we doing? Could someone tell me what do they think that first letter's about? The one that's has the names removed, excised.
Characterization of one of your clients' parents in support of them being abused.
Right.
So you're making a reference for adoption.
Right.
Say it again. Say what he says.
He said, I'm writing a reference for an adoption, and I am. And what kind of adoption is it? Huh? What is it? What kind of adoption? What kind of family situation am I writing about? I mean, as expressed in the letter.
So it sounds like you're getting a person with a different cultural background.
One issue is that you can see is that the parent and the prospective child are from different are of different races. But what else? What kind of letter is it? Who's in the? Who am I? I'm writing for one parent, right? So you call a single parent adoption. Right? Anything else that you want to say about it? What about the second letter? What's different about the first letter and the second letter? Well, actually, you don't know yet. You haven't read both of them. But I was waiting to hear someone say that. Well, what about the second letter? Those of you who read the second letter, and then I'm going to have you switch. What about it?
Basically trying
Right, right, and all the parties in the family are forward in the, okay, switch quickly and read the other one real quickly. The one you haven't read. So now, what are some obvious differences in these two examples? I'm going to start calling on people. You people up here are in trouble. I brought some of my own. I mean, what are some differences? What's happening? If you listen to Catherine and you listen to Cindy talk about kind of the need for validation of family, you see the differences in these two letters. The first letter is about a very stable nuclear family who already have two children, who are the parents of two children. And I couldn't mention the other parent. The other parent doesn't exist in the adoption. To mention the other parent would mean that the adoption would not happen. So it's kind of having to hide the status of that family. These are two lesbians who had been together also as long, or I think longer than Margie and Cindy, and already had two kids who were doing very beautifully. And yet, each time, the same parent had to go through the single-parent adoption procedure. That's why, for me, the Love Cooksey decision was so monumentally important. Now, imagine the child who becomes aware very early that he or she can only really claim one parent, that there's something wrong with the bond between the child and that second parent, that other parent, that somehow it's looked at as less, or it's looked at as non-existent. And so for me, the need for children to be able to establish their rights, more than the parents' rights, for me anyway, from my end of the mirror. And so that's really the only point I have.
Thank you. We're going to entertain questions now, and let me tell you that the presentation is being taped for local cable access television and National Public Radio, so you must use one of the two microphones when you give us your comment or question, otherwise you won't be heard by the larger audience. Please introduce yourself before you begin. Limit yourself to a short comment or a question, and we'll alternate between the two microphones starting right here. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Bo Bolter, and I'm a fellow here at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. I've enjoyed your remarks and your presentation very much. I want to ask the panel, or I don't know who to ask this specifically, so anybody. Some of you're probably all familiar with Dr. Patello here at Harvard, who until recently was director of the Center for Behavioral Sciences, and who was associate chairman of the Department of Psychology and directed the psychological laboratories here at Harvard. And he is one of those, certainly not from the religious right, who argued that society does have legitimate and secular reasons for maintaining some distinctions between heterosexuals and homosexuals. And I guess that's what I want to ask is, do any of you believe that society does have some right, or interest, I should say, in maintaining some legal distinctions? And if not, how would you respond to the concerns that many of us do have, who think that we do have an interest in maintaining the traditional family, and we do have an interest in reducing the risks of children becoming homosexuals, given the fact that nurture plays such an important part in that? Is there anything you could say to reassure us that risk would be, somewhat reduced?
I'll just say a few things. I'm sure Catherine, from a legal perspective, will want to respond to that. I think that people have a notion when they think about parents, gay-headed parents, that every other kind of family, first of all, is this kind of nuclear family where there's the mother and the father, and all of the positive role models that parents want to have for their children collected around the dinner table every night. And of course, that's not true. I mean, we all, in our own families, seek out a variety of positive role models to offer our children. That's one thing I wanted to say. And the second thing I wanted to say is there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that there's any relationship between the sexual orientation of the parent and the sexual orientation of the child. And thirdly, from a very rich and long experience with a variety of family styles in my work, both at Tufts and prior to that, there are absolutely no qualitative differences between the experiences that parents are offering their children that relate to the sexual orientation of the families. As a matter of fact, and I've often been asked not to say this because it kind of smacks of, well, gay parents are better. And I don't think that's true, but there is a sense of the need for preparation among gay and lesbian parents that is powerful and laudable. They make decisions about the institutions and the places that they're going to put their children with the kind of planning and analysis and preparation that is unmatched with any group with which I'm aware.
Is there any evidence that postnatal environment affects sexual orientation?
Well,
I just actually want to ask you, if you're asking the question in both directions, is there any evidence both that homosexual parents affect the sexuality of their children, or that heterosexual parents affect
Sure, that's included in my question.
Right.
Isn't there evidence that postnatal environment, maybe in addition to genes or nature itself, but that postnatal environment, whether in a heterosexual family or homosexual family, affects the sexual orientation of the child? There is
the
such
sexual
evidence.
orientation or the sexuality? I mean, there's lots of evidence.
Well, the sexual preferences, the sexual choices, because it's not determined just by genes or nature, but also by environment.
Well, in preparation for this, I actually went off and did quite a bit of reading on that topic, and I must say that if we take the Harvard Law Review as the last word on this issue, the evidence they cite in their book, The Homosexuality and the Law, which one of the committee members was kind enough to share with me, says that there is no conclusive evidence that it's a nurture-related issue, that right now people believe, research is tending to demonstrate that homosexuality has a strong biological component to it, and that growing up in a family where there is a gay person being nurtured by a gay person, whether it's your biological parent or close family member, nanny, adoptive parent, does not affect a child's sexual orientation. Now, is exposure, familiarity, and comfort with people of a variety of sexual orientations more likely to make children, and therefore when they are adults, comfortable with a variety of sexual identities? Probably true. Probably true. So in the future, will we see perhaps less discomfort with homosexuality as a result of the 8 to 10 million kids growing up in lesbian and gay families, very probably, and that's going to have an effect on the national or local mores around sexual identity, very likely. But that's quite different than saying it's a nature-nurture thing.
I want to just say something about the notion about the family in terms of the secular reasons and the secular policy reasons behind nurturing the heterosexual norm. I suppose if you still believe that the function of the family is as it was traditionally for economic reasons, then maybe that, I'm not sure that even stands true, because traditionally the beginnings of the family in dealing with these lines, one was inheritance in terms of being able to identify who should inherit your property so that you have family, and two was to have workers to be able to advance the goals of capitalism. And I'm not sure that those are still, and maybe three was to convey and transmit values. Maybe in the 19th century became more about transmitting values. I'm not sure that heterosexuality in a secular sense is the exclusive province of being the most well-equipped to do that. If you're talking about continuing to have a society that is vibrant, creative, industrious, hardworking, ethical and moral, I am not sure that there's a distinction between heterosexuals and homosexuals around that. So I have a hard time understanding, is there any secular reason or even religious reason for precluding lesbians and gay people to be part of the United States culture as a matter of policy? And I never really understand that question.
No, but you do think that society has an interest in maintaining the family, heterosexual and homosexual, I suppose.
Well, you know, I'm not going to say I'm not sure about that, but as I teach family law and I do family law, you know, in the American family, you know, in Massachusetts, every 12 days a woman is murdered by the man she lives with. That is an American family. 1 out of 4 girls can expect to be incested by someone in her family. So when you say that we have an interest in the family, I want to make sure, what is our interest in terms of the family? Do we define it by this biological unit, or do we define it by its function? And if we define it by its function, we're talking about healthy families or healthy groups of people that may or may not be biologically connected. And furthermore, the other thing I frequently talk about is we don't really have that policy. We don't have a policy about families. We talk about policy. Politicians talk about policy all the time. We don't have a policy. When we have a culture that begins to have licenses, not just to go out and get married, but licenses that are based on, we train people to drive more than we train people to raise children in this culture. We don't step in until we're ready to take kids away, until their hands are burned in boiling water. We don't take the time to teach parents how to be parents, and we don't teach them how to be good partners.
Well, I'm with you on that. But is it one of the functions of a family to reproduce human society?
I wanted to just respond also, if that's okay.
Yeah, do the reproduction.
I mean, is that a function or
I
not?
think my family's fulfilled that function.
That's right.
But I say that with hesitation. I say that with hesitation, and I also say that the studies that Janet quoted around the sexual orientation of the children of lesbians and gay men is statistically not different than the sexual orientations of the grown-up children of heterosexual couples. That there's been found to be no distinction along those lines. I only say that I say those things with hesitation because I feel that it's somehow justifying my choices around having children. And sometimes I wish that gay people did raise only gay children, because then we would be assured that the generation of children growing up gay would have supportive people around them who would nurture them, because many people growing up who were raised by heterosexual parents don't have that support and do all sorts of, difficult things. I feel bad for people who have to come out after they've been married and have children, because I think that that's a horrible thing for them to go through, for the children, for the spouse, as well. And I wish that everyone had the support around their sexuality so that they could understand their choices earlier and act in accordance with them. So I just feel like it would, you know, I just hope that any children who are growing up gay have parents who would support them in that. I don't think it's going to swell our numbers. I think there's just a certain amount of, you know, the Kinsey study said 10%. There's just always going to be a certain number of people who are gay and lesbian, and society is just going to have to, you know, accommodate the fact that there are gay and lesbian people in it. And but I don't think that our having children is going to affect those numbers. I do think that it will affect the comfort level of people who are growing up gay and lesbian.
Thank you for your question, and also thank you for eradicating my concern that we wouldn't have any conversation at the end of this panel discussion. I'm going to move over here. Yes?
Hi, my name is John Cook. I work at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences here. First of all, I'd like to just ask all of you why you didn't ask the last